The first of both is like given by Ben Kurtz, and it's called short attention span security, which is like some sort of lightning talk, but like 8 of them, I think.
Yeah.
And he has so many slides, so we will see how much he really managed to do in that time. So say hello to Ben for his talk.
I don't necessarily speak in public that often, so if I have a nervous breakdown or something, or if you have trouble paying attention to me or understanding what I'm saying, I've written up all of the talks that I'm going to go over, and I've put them on a website along with all of the code and links that I'll mention tonight. So if you go to the site awgh.org, it's right up there, I pronounce it og.org. You'll find pretty much all of the content from this talk. So with that said, you can zone out and think about something else. So some of the subjects I'm going to go over right now. I'm going to talk about script injection in Flex. I don't necessarily have a universal solution, but I have a couple of tips that might be helpful. I'm going to talk about EFI, which is the new BIOS framework that's going to become a universal standard over the next year. I'm going to talk about a GCC plugin from Mozilla called Dehydra, which actually makes it possible to write your own static analysis using just JavaScript. So it's open source, it's free, I've had a lot of fun with it, so I'm going to talk about that. And if I have time, I've written some scripts that automate the Aircrack NG toolset that I use on embedded devices just for cracking WEP. That's a little less interesting, so I push it to last. But if you were attracted by the phrase short attention span, you're probably already bored. And being the Christmas season, I've made a toy. So it's my present to you. I hope you like it. It's something that messes with Mailinator. If you don't know what Mailinator is, it's a website that offers anonymous email service. So it's something that you would use if you were signing up for like a torrent tracker or a porn site or something, and you didn't necessarily want to get any spam, so you wouldn't want to give them your real email address. Now, what's a little bit different about Mailinator from other sites that offer anonymous email is that you don't need to go to the Mailinator website before you use it. Any email address any email that's addressed to a Mailinator address or any of Mailinator's aliases, it has several domain aliases like sogetthis.com, thisisnotmyrealemail.com, there's a bunch. But you can just send it an email and then go without doing anything first, and then go collect that email from the website without logging in. There's no users. Every email that goes to the site can be accessed by everybody, although it only will stay up there for an hour or two. So I wrote 2 scripts. Together I call them the Mailinator-nator. But this is just sort of, I was doing a lot of web pen tests, and I was getting sort of increasingly irritated by just how bad most forget password pages are. So I saw a bunch of forget password pages that just ask you for an email address, and they don't forbid people from signing up with Mailinator email addresses. So maybe you can see where this is going already. The other thing that forget password fields never do is they never check for brute forcing, even if the login page checks for brute forcing. Because since the user's unauthenticated, they'd have to ban somebody by IP, where on the login page you can lock a user out. So I think some people sort of get lost in what they would actually have to do. But the first script simply brute forces the forget password field on a list of sites, and tries every email address or every username from a list of usernames combined with all of the aliases from Mailinator. So it'll try Bob at Mailinator and Bob at SoGetThis and Bob and so on. All right. So the idea would be that you would point this at some site that you wanted accounts on for some reason, and it would just go through the list. They're probably not looking for this sort of attack. And anytime it gets a hit, it's going to issue an email to Mailinator that will have either a password reset link or sometimes the plain text password, which is a big no-no. And then the second script, which is actually more useful on its own, reads the same user list from a file and then goes out to Mailinator and collects all emails addressed to that user that have the word password. So I did hard code the English word password, which has worked on some Italian sites, but you may want to add a word for your language of choice. This is also fun without using the brute forcing script, just as a cron job, because you can collect password reset emails that you didn't ask for yourself sometimes. So I actually got this idea too. You may have, I don't know if this was covered out here, but one of our vice presidential candidates' Yahoo email address was hacked into by someone exploiting a really bad forget password logic in Yahoo. They asked just really simple security questions: birth date, favorite color, things that were easily guessable or look upable online. The one thing I'd just like to remind everybody, the forget password page exists for the sole purpose of letting people bypass authentication. So you should just sort of be more careful in general. Well, maybe not you specifically, maybe your customers. But, I love Mailinator. I actually use it myself. You do have the option, if you do ask for a password reset link, you can go to the Mailinator site and you can go through a CAPTCHA and you can force it to delete a single email. So if you have an email issued and you go and collect it right away, there's a really small window that someone else's cron job would catch your password. So I didn't want to anger them. I'm not really sure how they make money. It seems to be some sort of experiment in server architectures where they just want to collect a whole bunch of spam and see if their network dies. I have no idea like what they're really up to, but this doesn't appear to violate their terms of service at all because they don't have users, they don't have terms of service. So I just need to add a disclaimer here that if you actually log in using someone else's password and it's not an authorized pen test, this is illegal in every jurisdiction. So just once again, these scripts are available on the website at that link, or you can just go to og.org and all of the files are linked from there. New topic. So there's an urban legend in the security community, and I just say it's a legend because I've never seen this myself, but I've heard a couple of different stories, where you've got a lowly system administrator who notices one day that all network traffic coming off the network card of one of his machines is being duplicated and forwarded to an IP address in a country with no extradition treaty. So thinking there's some sort of malware installed, there's some sort of rootkit, he reformats the hard drive and reinstalls the operating system. Sure enough, when he fires it up again, it's still happening. So people forget that there are more places in the computer that have executable code that can be rewritten than the hard drive. So I'd just like to talk about BIOS rootkit a little bit. Specifically because of EFI, but I'll get to that in a minute. And in the past, because BIOS rootkits and legacy BIOS are notoriously hard to do. I think I've met maybe 2 people lifetime total that could have like successfully written one. There aren't any really pre-made libraries that you can get openly if you don't work for a BIOS company already. So if you want to do network traffic, you have to write a network driver at the lowest level conceivable. And you need to write it in 16-bit mode, which is, I mean, I'm not that, well, it's pretty archaic. So there were a couple other news mentions of other hardware attacks in the news last year, and I think this is going to be a much bigger vector in the future. For example, there were some catalysts sold on eBay that actually had a backdoor rootkit implemented in hardware. And I think they were selling them out of Asia, but I'm actually not sure about that. And then there were a bunch of USB picture frames sold that had the U3 exploit that did auto run and installed malware that way. So in general, there's two ways of delivering a BIOS rootkit. You can flash an additional BIOS module to the BIOS itself. There are some secure chipsets from, there's one from Phoenix and one from Intel that will require BIOS modules be signed, and that can be supported with a TPM, which can hide a private key. But they can also be flashed to PCI option ROMs. So not all PCI cards have these. Usually you'll find them in high-end network cards or high-end video cards. But every PCI card can have a flash chip or a ROM chip that contains executable code. They can contain up to 8 PCI option ROMs, they're called. And what those are used for, normally, when the BIOS starts up, it enumerates all of the PCI devices on the bus, and for each one, it goes out and asks if it has an option ROM. If it does have an option ROM, it copies the contents of the option ROM into memory, and then executes it with ring 0. There's no safeguard or anything, and it has to be executed with ring 0 because what this code is for configuring the chips on the PCI card at the lowest level. So you can't, like once you decide that an option ROM can execute, there's no way of preventing what it can do. Now both of these methods can be done remotely if you've already owned a box and gotten root or admin. There's a way to elevate your privilege from that to the point that you can flash on Windows and Linux. Additionally, some PCI devices can be reflashed over PXE. But I'm not going to go into that. So. Once a BIOS rootkit has been loaded, the BIOS code itself, or most BIOS code, only executes once, which is at boot. So in order to make the rootkit work while the OS is in flight, you need to find a place to hide your code from BIOS where the OS where it can be executed once the OS is running. The two main methods of doing this are to hide it in ACPI machine language, which was a method described by John Heisman in 2 papers in 2006, one of which I would highly recommend is called Implementing a PCI Rootkit. The downside of this approach is that it's easily noticeable because everyone can access the contents of the ACPI hooks. The other method, which shows a lot more promise but isn't as widely understood, even by me, I should point out, is system management mode, which is a feature built into Intel chips and AMD chips, which is kind of like a timeout from the normal functioning of the processor. You send a special instruction, the contents of everything are sort of frozen, and you go into this sort of special maintenance mode where you can assign traps to I/O port reads, and then have so when a particular I/O port is read from, you can assign handler code from BIOS. And this is actually really sneaky because it's pretty difficult for an average user couldn't necessarily open that up and see what's in there. Now, since I've gotten to this conference, I met Peter Stug of Coreboot, and he really, in the last year and a half, I've been asking random people I meet on the street if they know anything about system management mode. He's the first person that was like, yeah, I know all about system management mode. Not only that, I wrote a library that helps you assign SMM traps, and it's in Coreboot. So if someone was interested in writing an SMM rootkit,